Hi all. So the purpose of this video is to get us familiar with Google Sheets, which is the spreadsheet program that we're going to be using this semester, and also to get some practice downloading data into that program. So let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen here. You can find Google Sheets in your in the Google Drive. So if you go to the Launchpad and click on Google Apps, of course. If you go over here to the New button, you have lots of options, and I'm sure you've seen Google Docs and Google Slides over here. Google Sheets is one of your options. So when you click on Google Sheets, that'll open up the spreadsheet. So a spreadsheet is just a way to organize data in a tabular form, in a table form. So it has columns, and the columns are labeled with letters here. And it has rows, and the rows are labeled with numbers. So columns and rows, and each of these little squares that corresponds to a location at a particular column and row combination is called a cell. So these are cells. Each of these individual squares are cells or rectangles, and you have rows and columns here. There's also you can also have multiple sheets within a single Google Sheet. That's a little bit confusing about the naming here, but you can see here at the bottom there's a little tab, like a folder tab, and this is sheet 1. You can add new sheets by clicking on this little add button here, and you get a second sheet in here. So you can toggle back and forth between various sheets within Google Sheets. So what are we going to do today? I'm going to get rid of this extra sheet. Just to avoid some extra confusion. Actually, maybe I'm going to get rid of this entire spreadsheet because I want to start at the beginning. So in this assignment, for our first assignment, what I want you to do is get used to the idea, or to get some practice downloading data from a database, which is an organized way of keeping data electronically. So you want to take that data out of a database and put it into one of your Google Sheets. So usually you can take it out in a sheet form, and then you want to put it into your own file. And I'm going to be using Christmas bird count data because that's what we just talked, or that's what you just learned about. Bill's talk about the Christmas bird count. Talked about the data that's available through the Citizen Science Project. And he had some questions that he's interested in based on data that's been gathered and his observations. And you may have questions about birds based on what you learned by watching that, or you may have other questions. I am going to describe how to do this, in how to download the data and work with it using this Christmas bird count data. My ideal for you is that you use some other data source. So if you look at our folder for this week, so this is this week's folder, you'll see this item called data repositories, and this is several different places where you can find either databases or sets of databases which have data that you could download and again use for this first assignment. So to get an A on this assignment, you would need to find something new. To get an A-, you can basically use my model, use what I'm doing here as a model, and download Christmas bird count data. But my ideal is for you to try something new and to start thinking about the ideas that you might have about questions you could ask and answer using data that's available to us. Okay, so the Christmas bird count. I'm going to start by opening up this link here, which is to the main bird count site. Data site. So this is a link to their database. And this is kind of an old-fashioned interface. There, if you'd use another database source, it might be a lot slicker than this. This is really kind of clunky looking. And in fact, it is a little clunky in its usage because one of the things well, let me back up a second. What I'm going to download is historical data that looks at the count of a particular bird over a certain time period, so over a bunch of different Christmas bird counts in a single count area. So if you remember from Bill's talk, he talked about being in the Rochester Count Circle. The Rochester Count Circle is one of hundreds of circles around the country, or around the actually around North America, and there are many places that you could get data from. So the one thing about the way that you get data out of this database is that you need to know the location, a code for the location that you're collecting the data from, that you're gathering the data from. And to do that, you have to know the codes, and to get the codes, you have to go back to in this data repository item in our folder. You can see this bullet point, the link to the CBC Christmas bird count circle names. When you click on this, you'll get a map, and you'll see all of the different count circles in North America, and there's even some in South America and in the Pacific Ocean, most of which are US territories. So, so you can see these hundreds of count circles. All of these little icons represent a count circle. The colors don't really have meaning from our perspective. They have to do with some record keeping that Audubon is doing. But if I zoom in on New York State, I can see here's the count circle that Bill participates in, the Rochester Count Circle. If I click on that circle, I can see the location is Rochester and the abbreviation for this circle. So that's what I want to know, is this 4-letter abbreviation is NYRH for Rochester. If you're interested in getting data from somewhere else in New York State, or in North America, or even down into Central America, you're welcome to do that, like we're just exploring right now. But what you'll need to do is click on the count circle and look for the 4-letter code before you proceed. Okay, so once you have your 4-letter code, you want to go back to the site and go the database itself, and go to the historical data and click on results by species. And I am going to look for a data on a bird that I'm interested in. So I really kind of like great blue herons. They are a very dramatic species. You may be familiar with this bird. It's a common water bird. It's very tall, has long legs, a long neck. So I just typed the common name into the search box here, and I've got a bunch of different options, but I'm going to stick with the one that's the simplest, which is this one. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. And then I'm looking for a particular set of years, and I want to look at the last, let's say 30 years. So the years here are listed a little bit funny. The year based on the common era is on the right side here. On the left side, you have the count year. So this is how many counts there have been. So there have been 122. Actually, this past year, the one that just completed is the 123rd year that the Christmas bird count has taken place. And if you go all the way back, you can see the first count is in 1900. So, so I want to go back 30 years. So I want to go back to 1992. Actually, I guess I would go back to 1993. No, 92, because we're only going up to 2021 to 2021. Okay, so that's this 30-year span. And then here is where I want to enter in my count circle code. So NYRH, you can see I've searched this before. It doesn't matter if the case doesn't matter here. Okay, so I'm looking for the Christmas bird count data for great blue heron over 30 years in the Rochester Circle. Before I download the data, I can actually, in this database, I can look at it by clicking on this view button. So I click on the view button and it takes a couple of minutes, and look, there's no data found. That actually doesn't surprise me. I set this up to fail. Great blue herons are migratory birds, so they fish in open water. You wouldn't necessarily expect to see any in the winter. Now that's changing. I saw one actually a couple of weeks ago, but for the most part, none, well, in the Rochester Circle, none have been counted ever in a Christmas bird count, at least in the last 30 years. Okay, well, I guess I got to change what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go back up to the selected species. And another bird that I really like is the black-capped chickadee. And it's that cute little feeder bird that we sometimes see around. So I'm going to type in black-capped chickadee. And nothing comes up. That's sort of disappointing. This seems like a very common bird. This is not an uncommon situation where you would type in a search term and it would give you nothing as a result. It turns out that black-capped chickadee, I know this now because I searched it before, black-capped needs to have a dash in between the two words, and there I can find it. So if you run into a case where you're looking for a particular bird and nothing is coming up, but you're pretty sure that they're around, that those birds are around here or in the count circle that you're interested in, you might need to try a different version of the name. Here, what if I just put in chickadee? There's actually a few different species of chickadees. So there's a few that so I'd want to pick the one that makes the most sense, or that fits my criteria here. So black-capped chickadee is right there. So I'm going to choose black-capped chickadee. I'm going to keep the same year range, same count circle, and then I think it'll come up if I just hit view. I might have to re-enter something because it might still be. Oh no, it's fine. So here's the data for the last 30 years. So I can see, the year number, the count, and it even gives me a little graph of how many birds were counted per party hour. So per number of people by hour, and how many hours they were searching. So that's good data. So that means I can download it. So I'm going to download it. I usually choose to download it by using Excel because Excel is already native on my machine. But if you have a different spreadsheet program and you want to move between whatever is on your desktop to the Google Sheets, you can download a CSV. This is a comma separated values file, and that should be able to be uploaded into any spreadsheet program. But I'm going to download Excel on my desktop here, which is a PC. That data always shows up down in this bar at the bottom. But if I don't see it down there, I can go to this little kebab menu in the upper right-hand corner next to my face. And there's a downloads link there, or a downloads, link. And I can see this data. So when I click on this, or the file rather that I just downloaded, when I click on it, it will open up Excel because I've already used Excel on my machine before. If you've never used Excel before and you download an Excel file and try to open it, you should, if you're connected to Fisher's network, be able to download the program Excel or get access to it, because we all have access to the Microsoft products. Okay, so what I want to do though is move this information into Google Sheets, because that's where we're really going to do our work. I think the easiest way, the most straightforward way to do that is to select the data that you want to move into Google and then copy and paste it there. So all I want is the actual data table. I'm not interested in this graph right now. So I just, right-clicked on it and selected all those rows and columns that corresponded to the data I want. And then I can, I left-clicked on it, and then I selected everything. And then I can right-click and copy, or those of you who use the keystrokes, you can do Control-C, of course. If you're doing this on an Apple machine, I'm not as familiar with all of the Apple commands, but you can copy and paste from Apple spreadsheets as well as you can from a PC spreadsheet. Okay, so I've copied that data and now I want to import it into a Google Sheet. So I want to go back to my Drive, and I'm going to I mean, you could in the main part of your drive, just start a new sheet, but I want to do mine in this class, right? So I want to be able to find it. So I think it's easiest to navigate to where you want the Google Sheet to be before you add a new sheet, because then it'll be there. Otherwise you have to move it. So I'm opening up Google Sheets. I'm going to create it. I don't think you'll get that dialog box because this is about sharing, which you're not sharing the whole folder. And then I want to paste the data into this sheet. And I can do that either by highlighting this first box A1 or by highlighting the whole sheet, which I can do by hitting that little blank box between A and 1. So either way, I can either Control V for pasting it. Oops, did I not copy it? Oh, no, I didn't. Okay, that's not good. So let's go back and I will copy it from Excel. Maybe I need to enable editing. Let's see. We'll copy. And okay. So hopefully I didn't leave you behind there. Either way, hopefully it's not too difficult for you to copy and paste data from one format to another. This resource kept its formatting pretty well, so I'm happy about that. You may run into trouble where it looks funny, and that might take a little bit of doing. You might decide, I don't want to mess around with that, or you can always email me if you have questions about how things are pasting into various, from one set to another. Okay, so now we're going to do some basic hygiene, I guess you'd say, of these sheets. So the first thing I want to do is make a working copy of the data I just imported. And I do this because I always want to be able to go back to the original data without having to recreate all of the steps I took to download this sheet. So, or to download it to this sheet. So what I do here is click on the sheet, the little arrow button by sheet 1, and hit duplicate. And that just immediately makes a copy. And I'm going to change the name of that. So again, I'm hitting the drop down menu arrow, and I'm going to rename it and call it my working copy. So that is just good practice. And in fact, what you can do is protect this original sheet by, if you go to the drop down menu, if you click this protect sheet command over here on the right, you could give it a description. I'll just call it original download. And then you want to set the permissions. And really what you want to do, I mean, you don't want to edit this. So you want to change the sheet permissions so that you get a warning if you ever accidentally try to edit this particular page or this particular sheet of the spreadsheet. Let me show you how that works. So if I wanted to write in, so say I started to write in a new number here. Oh, look at this. It's telling me that I'm trying to edit part of the sheet that shouldn't be changed accidentally. Do I want to do that? No. So that always keeps you from accidentally messing up your original sheet, is protecting it. Okay, on my working copy, we do a few changes, or we can do all sorts of changes. I want to do a few things, or there's something that I always want you to do, and that is to get used to making this a little easier to read. So one thing you could want to do, usually, you see how this data doesn't all fit on one screen, at least on my computer. One way to make this a little easier to read is to lock or freeze this top row. And I do that, actually, I don't even have to select it here in Google Sheets. You do that by hitting View, going to View, and freezing a row. So I can freeze that top row, and that allows me to scroll up and down through the data without losing the information that's in this header row. You can also freeze freeze columns, which allows you to scroll left and right without losing information in a column. So that's a very handy little feature. So I'm not going to worry. I don't want to freeze that first column because it's not that useful. So I'm going to unfreeze it. So that's one way that it makes this data a little easier to read. Another thing that makes the data easier to read is when you have these names that are kind of long for a column, one way to consolidate all that information without stretching the columns very wide is to select that row and go up here to your tool menu, and you see this little circle or this arrow that's turning back on itself. That's called text wrapping. If you click that, turn it on so that it's wrapped, all of the text within a column will stack. So it's a lot easier to read, and you're not losing information because the columns are too narrow. The other thing I like to do with a working copy is get rid of extra columns, extra rows, that kind of thing. So actually, before I do that stuff, I want to create a cover sheet. So I'm going to add a cover sheet, and this cover sheet is going to have a narrative on it. And I'll do that by going down to this bottom left and clicking on the plus sign and getting a new sheet. And I'm going to call that cover sheet. Oh, by the way, I just double clicked on that. So you can rename by hitting the drop down menu here, or you can just, like with a lot of things, you can just double click on the name, and then that allows you to change to rename it. And I should also title this spreadsheet. So I'm going to call it Spreadsheet Assignment 1. Okay, cover sheet. I'd like to put that in the front where you would expect it. Put my locked sheet at the end because that's just a little bit extra. But on the cover sheet, we're going to put a text box. And in Google Sheets, that's a little bit different than in Excel, if you're familiar with that. What I want to do is to put in a text box, I need to insert a drawing. So that's on the insert menu over here. And here's one of the options is to insert a text box. So you just draw a text box. And the first thing you want to write is just sort of a reminder of what this is and why you downloaded it. So data about black-capped chickadee counts in the Rochester, New York, CBC. And I'll put the I'll even put the code in there. From 1992 to 2021, downloaded for. So I mean, I'm obviously this is downloaded for practice. But sometimes you might, if in fact, with whatever data you download yourself, you may already have an idea of what you might want to do for a data analysis project. You could say, look, for instance, I could be looking for a relationship between number of feeder birds and air temperature count day. So I might have a hypothesis. I might have an idea that the counts go down if it's warm out or if there's not much snow because the birds are more widely distributed. They're not hanging out at feeders. So so that helps you kind of remind yourself, 2 days from now, 2 weeks from now, why this data exists. Why did you download this data? What was your thought at the time? Okay, so for now, we'll just leave it at that. We're going to add more. I'm going to pull this up to the top so that's always visible when you first open that sheet. Okay. The other thing that you want, actually, the other information that you want in this folder or in this narrative is the citation information. So if you go to the assignment, you'll note that you want to have, so I said you want a short narrative explaining what the data is and why you decide to download it, and then the relevant citation information. And that citation information includes all these pieces: author, date of publication, title, publisher, and electronic location. Before you try to reconstruct that yourself, you should see if the source that you collected the data from has that already available to you. So here I can look at the overview and instructions page for this database. And I can see that, that there is a sentence here: to learn the proper citation format for data viewed through the CBC database, see the CBC bibliography page. So if I click on that link, I get, you know, information about where this came from, but also the citation formats. So if I'm going to reference the Christmas bird count in say a final project, I can use the formats that they suggest. So for CBC data obtained directly from the database through the website, use this format. So that's what I just did. I took data out of the database from the website, so I can just copy that citation information. Again, Control-C helps me do that. Go back to my spreadsheet and put this in the narrative. So that's got the author and the publisher, the year, the title, the URL, and then it asks me to include the access date. So I'll put that in. Today is January 11th. So that goes in there too. The other thing I want to record in this cover sheet is any transformations I do. So let's talk about these transformations. We're going to go back to our working copy and see what we might want to do here. So, like I said, I kind of want to get rid of extra rows. And this column is sort of funny. Like there's the name and the code. The code is not that useful to me. So I want to create a column that's just names. And this came in where all of these cells are merged together. So I think I want to just copy that name, Control-C, and put it in the code cell, and make this column B where the name is. So I'm getting rid of the code and I'm replacing it with the name. So here's the name. I can continue to paste that into place, or I can use this cool little function in Google Sheets where you can copy things from one cell to another cell by grabbing this little handle here. So you see this little blue over large corner. If I hover over it, I get this plus sign, and I can just left click on that and pull it down so that it replaces the information that's in all of the cells below it. So that's pretty slick. So now I know that all of these are black-capped chickadees. I can delete this first column. So I'm just, now I'm right-clicking on this and I get the option to delete the column. And now I have a blank first row, so I'm going to select that whole. So I selected the column by selecting the letter that describes the column, and I can select the row by selecting the number, clicking on the number that describes the row. And I can delete that. Okay, there's a few other things I'd like to do to kind of clean this up. One is that this may or may not happen with the data that you download, but the year, the number per party hour, and the number of reporting species, number of counts that reported the species are merged. So these are two columns where the cells are merged together into one column. And sometimes that can kind of mess up your calculations if you're going to do any. So I want to get rid of this extra column. So I'm going to select those two columns, and I'm going to go to Format. And you can see that one of the commands under Format is merging cells, but it also allows you to unmerge them. So I just unmerged those cells. So now I have two separate columns. B is separate from C. And I can now delete that column. I'll show you what happens if I didn't do that. Like say I wanted to delete, I think I want to delete this column G. Because it's merged, if I select delete column, I actually, okay, it didn't happen that way. Let's see if this happens here. Usually you lose both columns. Yeah, in that case, I lost both. So maybe it was just because that was on the edge. So here's what I did. D and E together are merged together. If I try to get rid of D, which looks like it's just a blank column, if I delete it, I lose all of that information. So I can't do that. I need to select both of these columns first. Go back to Format, unmerge those cells, and get rid of the extra column. Actually, this column, the number of counts reporting the species, is not that useful because I only looked for one count. So I could also say I want to delete that. Okay, so I should make sure I keep track of all of that. So I'm going to go back to the cover sheet. And here's what I did. These aren't really data transformations, but a little bit. So I replaced the code, the species code with the common name. I unmerged cells and removed cells and removed empty columns. Maybe I should say unmerged columns and removed empty columns. And I removed column describing number of counts the data is species was found. Okay, so that's some of the data transformations I did. Another transformation that I could do here is this year is a little bit confusing, right? Because this is actually the year of the CBC. So this year was the 93rd year that CBC had been completed. I actually would be it's more useful probably for most people to see the year in the Common Era. So in our typical way of describing years, 1992 or 2021. So I'm going to add a new column. And I can do that by either selecting this column and insert a column to the right, or I can do it by going here and going to the drop-down menu and inserting a column to the right, whatever I want to do here. So, so I'm inserting an extra column and I'm changing this to, or I'm going to call this year in the Common Era, which is what we call our typical year description. And I'm going to use the CBC year to calculate the actual year in the Common Era. So to do a calculation in Sheets, you put in an equal sign, and that tells us that there's going to be some mathematical operation occurring. So to get the year of the actual Common Era year from the year of the count, I want to add 1899 to the CBC year. So why does that make sense? If year one was 1900, to get 1900 from 1, you would add 1899 to the number 1, right? So if I add 1899, that's taking care of all those years that there wasn't a count. Just so you can see, I selected this column, or I selected the cell, and it gave the cell address. So the cell address is column B, row 2. So that's what the B2 stands for here. And if I hit enter, I get the actual year. One cool thing about Google Sheets is that you get a suggested autofill, and this is exactly what I would want to do, is to transform all of these numbers into the CBC year into the actual year CE. So you can do that by just clicking go ahead, or I can say, oh, I didn't like that. I'll just show you how you would do it or how it works if you don't take the suggested fill. And that is just like when we pull down the name. If I grab this handle down here and I just pull it down through the years of the count, it'll make the same calculation for each one. So you can see when I click on any given cell, it gives the formula up here. And that's, again, 1899 plus the address of the neighboring cell. So B4, B5, B6. Okay, so one other thing I want to put on the cover sheet is that I created a year CE column calculated from the CBC count year data variable. Okay, so that's all of the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet assignment 1, what I want you to do is download some data, do some of these basic housekeeping steps, making a working copy, creating a cover sheet, putting the citation and a little narrative in the cover sheet, keeping track of whatever data transformations you've done, including if you've done none, which you could just write I did not, or no, none performed, something like that. And yeah, and that's this assignment. Let me know if you have questions, if you have any trouble downloading anything, but hopefully you'll find it fairly straightforward.